I would like to talk about yarn because obviously if you're going to use skipper pin looms, you're going to use some type of fiber, probably yarn. And yarn has exploded. Fiber artists are doing all kinds of fascinating things with yarn, and the choices are almost limitless. Every time I go into a yarn shop, I go to a fiber festival, I don't know how it happens, but more yarn comes home. So it's a lot of fun. Okay, this is a designer yarn, hand spun, hand dyed. I haven't yet balled it up. It will probably not be felted. I might felt a little bit. Some yarn I don't want to felt. I just want to either to weave with it and it will show itself. Sometimes the yarn is going to be the carrier for a project. Sometimes the yarn is going to be what is going to be showcased. And the weaver will make that distinction. For example, in this scarf, the yarn is what's being showcased. So that's the focal point, so to speak. Again, in this flower, that yarn is what's being showcased. But in this table runner, the yarn is not what's being showcased so much as the kind of cross-stitch design. So this would be, I think, a yarn that will be the focal point of the project. Again, another beautiful hand-spun, hand-dyed yarn that will probably be the focal point. I think when this yarn is felted, it will make a beautiful blended, blurred effect. This yarn I like very much. There's several very fine little strands connected. I think probably you would want to use this on one of the smaller pin looms because weaving the strands back and forth, they may be used up at different rates, so you will have some different lengths at the end. And on the bigger pin looms like the 8x8, I think it would just be a little bit too much stress on the fiber. That is something else that as you become more familiar with yarns and with your skipper pin looms, you will start to make some decisions about which size skipper loom to use for which yarn. This is a synthetic yarn. It's very nice, very bulky, chunky, and works great on any of the skipper pin looms. Again, I don't think this would be, I think this yarn would be a carrier for whatever you're doing, but it may not. You may want to weave it up into a really nice scarf. This yarn, one of those funky yarns, I think is best for the small looms. Again, because you've got several strands here. They can't really take the stress of in and out weaving that they could on the smaller looms. But it would make a beautiful effect. I did weave it up on a 2x2 loom and it was really neat, but it was a little bit difficult. I have used ribbon on the 4x4. Very interesting. It is slickery. The ribbon kept wanting to come out of the weaving needle, but it's interesting and it is an option. The skipper pin looms do offer options for whatever type of fiber you're using. This is worsted wool, hand spun on the 4x8. Really neat. I think probably it will be felted. Some weaving pin loom artists are knitting, this is knit around the edge, or crocheting around the edge. This is a hand spun fiber yarn, really crimpy. I like it like this, and I have felted it, and it felts really neat, very interesting. again, a coarse yarn, double warped and woven, well, triple warped and woven on a 4x4. You can see the grid pattern. That would be just wonderful for counted cross stitch. Again, this is an example where the yarn used on the 4x4 skipper loom is the carrier for the project, counted cross stitch in this case. It's not the focal point of the project. It's just the carrier. Here is another yarn, beautiful yarn. This would probably be best, again, used on one of the smaller skipper pin looms. Or you could blend it with a white worsted wool fiber for weaving and then felt it. And I think that would just be really beautiful felted because it'll just make a lovely blurred texture. That would be beautiful. This is acrylic, slickery, but this would withstand probably up to the 6x6 loom, maybe the 8x8, but variegated like that, you would get some very interesting combinations. Let's see. Oh, here we have yarn. This yarn has a lovely texture. Again, probably best on the smaller skipper looms, but blended with a white worsted wool or a solid worsted wool and felted, that would make a wonderful texture. When you take a worsted wool and use cotton crochet thread, then you felt them either at the kitchen sink or in the washing machine. The cotton crochet thread will not totally be immersed into the worsted wool fibers. It leaves a very nubby, bumpy textured effect, and it's really quite beautiful. Here is a square designer yarn, hand spun, hand dyed. I did it on the 4x4 loom and then I felted it. And it has some glitter yarn in it that has not totally immersed, as I said, with the cotton crochet yarn. So you get that sparkly effect, and that's really interesting. You can use roving yarn on the skippers and then felt that, and that is really interesting. That could be the focal point of your pin loom project, or it could be a carrier for some needle felting. I like using yarn like this on the skipper pin looms. That would make a beautiful skinny scarf, what I call a skinny scarf, on any of the rectangles, the 2x8, 2x6, 2x4, or the 2x2. The one thing that you do want to remember when you're using a thick fuzzy yarn is that when you're weaving your needle in and out, you have to kind of use your fingers to make sure you're getting it in and out under each thread, because you're building up this fuzzy yarn. But the effect is really beautiful. Again, here is another hand spun, hand dyed yarn. If it's just like knitting and crocheting. If you want a real lacy look, just use one strand. If you want more coverage, blend it with another fiber or double it and for extra coverage. This, again, I think would be just beautiful. Maybe paired up with this and then felted, or with a worsted wool. Fiber is just incredible. Now this is hand spun, hand dyed yarn, and it felts beautifully. It just is gorgeous. But again, it doesn't have to be, or you can gently felt it. Felting is not a science, it's an art. And you have to do it for a while to realize the point where you want to stop. It's a temptation to overfelt, at least it is for me. Let's see. Oh, this is merino, and this is going to be a 4x4 felted eyeglass case. It will be a carrier for the project because I will definitely needle felt on it. I don't know what yet, but I will. And here is, let's see, I feel like Mary Poppins reaching down into her carpet bag. This is synthetic, and I made a 2x8 skinny scarf out of this. It was really neat. I liked it a lot. The texture is just great. It produces a wonderful effect. Same thing with this yarn. And this is variegated, and I made a skinny scarf on the 2x8, and that was beautiful. That was just really neat. The one thing about buying yarn is you may not have a specific project in mind when you buy the yarn, but you're always worried about, are you going to buy enough to finish the project? Let's see here. What else we got? Oh, this is neat. Hand spun, hand dyed. I think it's Shetland, if I remember correctly. It's variegated. I'm down to one color because I used a lot of this ball of yarn, but there were different shades of color on it, and it was just beautiful. One thing that you can do, see now here are 4 worsted weight yarn, and the same brand of yarn, so it did felt evenly. If you wanted to needle felt something on it, saving your scraps, that is a big question. When you have your tails, like this is the tie-off tail, and you connected it, or maybe you're just doing a mug rug, so you weave that tail in and then you've got all that tail left. What are you going to do with it? Well, don't throw it away. The 2 things that I like to do with my leftover tails, like this tail, this is yarn or wool yarn. It will felt, and I will save it and crimp it at the kitchen sink to make really neat fringe on scarves or purses or pillows, and it's tedious, but it's very effective. Then you can make little balls, decorator balls or dryer balls. Now, if you want, you can go and buy a lot of worsted wool yarn and make your balls. But I recommend that you save your tails and you connect them. Just tie them together in knots. And nobody cares what the core of the ball is going to look like. Nobody sees that. So when you've reached the point that you've got your funny little tails in here in the core, then you can go to the good yarn and you can wrap a layer around that so that this doesn't show, and then just take a darning needle or a weaving needle and weave the tail through a couple of times to anchor it in and secure it. Then you put it into a clean pantyhose leg down in there, tie it real tight, and after you've got a long string and several of them, then felt them in the washing machine. And you might have to do it 2 or even 3 times to get them hard enough, but they make really interesting decorator table centerpieces for the small ones, and they're fun and they're fast to do. You can take roving yarn. This is actually roving yarn, or you can blend your yarns. It's a good way to use up yarn, and they're really kind of addictive to do. And the dryer balls do work. And then the smaller ones just make interesting, like I said, decorator things, especially when they're combined with nuts that you can find on your walks. So let's see, what else do we have down in here in my grab bag? This is variegated worsted wool. Same wool as this. This will self-stripe when knit. This will weave up into a plaid-like pattern when woven on the Skipper pin looms. Felts beautifully. But you don't have to felt it. And let's see, this. There are all kinds of this yarn out there. And I did a 2x8 skinny scarf. That was gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Very pretty. So here is a very thin yarn. You probably, unless you want a lacy effect, would probably want to double warp and weave with that. And let's see. This yarn I like very much. However, this is something you want to think about. It has a spongy core and then the wool is wrapped around it. It doesn't do real well with the bigger looms, but with the smaller looms, it works out great. The choices are huge and the fun is limitless. So again, have fun with your Skipper pin looms. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for joining us today. We've had a lot of fun showing new Skipper pin loom ideas. Remember to check out our website, www.bluebutterflyoriginals.com, for availability and pricing and tutorial ideas about the Skipper pin looms. We've just had a lot of fun. With one little pin loom, you get 5 craft options with weaving, felting, needle felting, kind of cross stitch embroidery, and rug hooking. So remember, with Skipper pin looms, the sky is the limit.